Thank you, Dr. Raj, for that very fast-paced and energetic presentation. Sounds like University of Iowa's killing it. Up next, we have one of my close friends, StanleyYuan. Stanley graduated from the Illinois Math and Science Academy in 2012 and Duke with a BSc in Electrical and Computer Engineering. He helped launch FarmShots, a startup that has already raised over $700,000 and is working as a software engineer at Microsoft. In college, he won $5,000 at Duke's Entrepreneurial ChangeWorks competition, in addition to serving as a member of the Duke Chronicle editorial board, the president of the Asian Alliance board, and a student intern at the Duke's Women's Center. Please give a round of applause for StanleyYuan.
Hi, everyone. So, like Archer said, I'm Stanley, and today I'll be talking a little bit about how to pursue excellence and why to do it regardless of college admissions. Next slide. Just a little bit about me. So I actually grew up in Naperville. I live right next to Naperville North in the Crest Creek area. And I went to Naperville North for a year and then attended the Illinois Math and Science Academy, residential boarding school in Aurora, for those of you who don't know. It's like math and science focused. I really enjoyed my time there. And then I was at Duke for just a little over 4 years. I graduated this past December, so very recent graduate. And I studied electrical engineering and computer science there, double majored. So like Harsha said, I was involved in a whole bunch of things while in high school and in college. A lot of it was kind of social justice focused or social good focused, but probably my biggest time commitment was helping to launch this startup. So it's called FarmShots. It's a kind of tech agricultural startup. We take satellite imagery of drones and satellite and drone imagery of farms and do image processing on it, so we can say like, oh, this part of your field has like less chlorophyll than the rest, so maybe you should check your sprinklers. And so this past August, we ended up raising just over $700,000, so it's doing pretty well. I think something that's really important to think about is that this is something that, and I'll talk more about this later, but this is something that was only possible because I was deciding to pursue this kind of excellence and to cut down my other commitments. So just a kind of heads up, applying to college and also generally pursuing excellence is not about trying to like fill up a laundry list of categories. Our startup was also selected as a Y Combinator fellowship company, which has like, I think under a 1% acceptance rate, and has also supported startups like Dropbox, Airbnb, Reddit, Coinbase. And this August, I'll be starting at Microsoft as a software engineer. Ultimately, I hope to end up to use this technology skills that I have for social good. Like I said, in college, I spent a lot of my time doing kind of social justice things, and so that's kind of the end game. So next slide. So I want to talk about pursuing excellence, right? But first, we have to define what is excellence. And so I have listed up here a bunch of different examples, right? You could write a book, you could start a company, being selected for the US math team, conduct research and get it published, or there are a whole bunch of other examples, right? And so I think the thing that kind of unites all these different broad categories is I think for a lot of people, like seeing these immediately kind of generate a wow response. Like, wow, that's so impressive. This is so cool. This is something that's hard for me to imagine that I could do. And so throughout this presentation, I'll break down a little bit of why it's possible and why I think this is best, the best kind of path for people to be pursuing in high school, regardless of whether you want to get into like the best college you can or not. So next slide. And so why pursue excellence, right? And I just listed off all these things that sound really impressive. But ultimately, I think the most important part is not that they sound impressive or that you can put it on your resume or you can brag or your parents can brag or whatever it may be, right? But ultimately, when you try to pursue these things, that's actually where you end up learning and growing the most. And that sets you up for high school, college, and beyond. And so you can challenge yourself and learn to be a more interesting person, right? And so all these things are really important, and that allows for you to meet more interesting people. I think there's a saying that, you are the composite of the 5 friends that you spend the most time with, right? And so the more time you spend with people who are also pursuing their interesting projects or who are also like being driven and doing their own thing, I think the more that you learn to challenge and grow yourself. You learn a lot by doing, and that like allows you to understand, like a lot of these things like writing a book or working at a startup or volunteering. These are things that you end up doing even after you graduate college. And so you get a heads up of, oh, this is what things might look like even after I graduate college. And you learn a lot more about how like a wide variety of people function in the real world. You become a lot more independent and learn how to take initiative and challenge yourself and figure out, oh, like if nobody is telling me like I have to do my homework or there are no assignments, like what do I actually want to be doing? What do I actually care about? What should I be spending my time on? And so thinking through this is really important. And then learning how to get in the habit of setting and achieving goals, right? I think it's really important to start learning and developing healthy habits for yourself as soon as you can, because honestly, for me, the biggest thing throughout high school and college has been learning these really great habits of like making sure to get enough sleep and making sure to stay on top of my work. I wasn't always super successful at that, but I think that's something that I want to take with me for the rest of my life, something I'll certainly use at Microsoft, something I certainly use at my startup, right? So setting up these habits is something that will follow you regardless of wherever you go to college or whatever you're doing. Next slide. And so also, I think it is super relevant for college as well. If you look at the number of like students who are on a math team or who are valedictorian of like a high school or who have a perfect SAT score, all these things are actually in the thousands, right? There are thousands of high schools, so thousands of valedictorians. There are thousands of people who get like perfect SAT and ACT scores. And so even if you maximize all of these things, that doesn't guarantee anything. There are a lot of college admissions officers at Ivy League schools who see tons of applications with like perfect 4.0s, perfect SAT scores, and a lot of these applicants still get rejected, right? So how do you make yourself stand out? And this isn't to say that GPA and SAT isn't important, because those are a really big part of your college application, but you want to make sure that that's not the only part, right? You're not just trying to get straight A's, that's not what your life should be about. How do you make yourself stand out? I think the list of things that I put out about excellence at the beginning, I think those provide like a lot more of an interesting college application to admissions officers who say, oh, wow, this person like wrote a book, or this person started a company, versus, oh, this person is one of thousands that has like a 4.0, right? So next slide. And so this is just kind of a little breakdown of how I think it makes sense to pursue excellence, because I think it's easy to see that big list of things and think, oh wow, like these are things that I like can't imagine doing, right? This is something that I like don't even know. Especially, I think one of the earlier presenters noted that most of you are either like sophomores or freshmen or even younger, and so for a lot of you it might be like very confusing to wonder, oh, how do I even begin to accomplish any of these things, right? And so if you break it down into these 6 steps, I think that helps provide a kind of framework for understanding, okay, this is not something that's like super impossible or super hard to accomplish. One anecdote that I think is really important before I jump too far in is the idea of mindset. So there have been like a lot of psychology studies that have showed the idea of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, and kind of the implications of that. So a fixed mindset is the idea that intelligence is kind of an innate thing. So you have your like IQ score or whatever other kind of like measure of intelligence you have. So you say like, oh, I'm like a smart person, or I'm not, or I'm somewhere in between. A growth mindset is the idea that your intelligence can grow and change, and you can actually like change your skills and knowledge, right? And so that intelligence is like not based on this kind of like IQ score. It's not inherent to any one person. And so there's a pretty famous study where they took, I think it was around 400 students, separated them into 2 groups. And so they had all these students take a pretty easy puzzle test. At the end, they told half the students, they said, wow, you did so well. You worked so hard on this test. And to the other half of the students, they said, oh, wow, you did so well. You're so smart. And so then afterwards, they decided to offer the students an option of taking a second test. They said, oh, you can either take this pretty easy second test, or you can take this much more challenging second test. And so for the students that said, or that were told, you're so smart, 90% of them said, oh, I want to take the easier test. Whereas for this group of students that said, that were told, oh, wow, you worked so hard, over half of them decided they wanted to take the harder test. So even in this one kind of simple word of affirmation of saying, oh, you're either smart or you work hard, they were able to change like a huge percentage of students' decision on what they wanted to pursue, right? They ultimately ended up giving all these students the exact same test. It was more challenging than the first. And the group of students that were told, oh, wow, you worked so hard, did significantly better. Because they noted that these students, because they were told, oh, you work so hard, as they were progressing through the test, they were thinking, wow, I just need to work harder and think about this. This is something that's doable if I just keep at it, right? Versus the students that were told, oh, wow, this is something that is really hard, maybe I'm just not smart enough, and then you start worrying about, oh, is this something that I can do? And so that's the idea that you can really do anything is actually something that I believe really strongly in. So just as you hear the rest of this, keep in mind, this is something that you can do. You can be anything you want. Like Bill Gates, Barack Obama, everyone was a high schooler at some point, right? And so everyone has changed. Everyone has grown and learned. And so anything is actually possible. So breaking it down into these 6 steps, I think if you go to the next slide, I think the slides, actually go back, sorry. I think the first one is just to pursue a kind of individual project of excellence, the different things of excellence that I was talking about. The first thing is just picking an interest. I think a lot of people get caught up on trying to think, oh, I don't know what I'm super passionate about. I'm not sure, right? And so I think that that's actually a huge barrier for a lot of people, but what you need to do is just decide something. I think passion is something that you learn and develop and grow, not something that you innately have. And so you just pick an interest, whatever it may be, and then continue on with it, right? So then you want to set a goal, and so that's number 2, set some sort of goal of oh, what do I want to do with it? So an example I might use is, say you want to start a blog about medicine. You're interested in medicine. So the interest would be medicine and blogging perhaps, and then the goal is oh, I want to have a successful blog. So that's the goal. And then the third step would be making a specific plan, right? You can have these broad goals, these visions in mind, but it's then once you actually break it down, then that's where you see, oh, how is this doable, how's it not? So if you want to start a blog, you have to, 1, be able to make a website, 2, have content to put on this blog, 3, set aside time to write this blog, right? So you start breaking it down into what are the actual steps that I need to make this happen. The 4th step is executing, doing it, right? I think that's something that's often very hard for me, actually. I spend too much time planning and thinking, and not enough time just going ahead and saying, okay, this is time to get started. This is something that I want to do. The 5th step is reviewing. And so I think another trap that a lot of people fall in is they end up spending too much time being focused on, oh, this is what I'm doing, I'm not spending enough time on it. And then you end up not taking a step back and wondering, oh, is this actually the most effective thing that I'm doing, right? So in the case of this blog, maybe you're spending too much time worrying about the graphics of the blog, or spending too much time trying to write about things when you actually don't have enough information or knowledge or skills to be able to write good content blog posts, right? And so taking a step back and allowing yourself to reflect and see, oh, is this what is actually the most important thing for me right now, is really important. And then the last is sustaining. So I think it's really easy also to have grand ideas of projects, work on it for maybe a week or 2, or maybe even a month, but then sustaining it over a long term, over multiple months or a year. If you wanted to make this blog a big thing, you'd probably have to be working on it for at least 4 or 5 months, right? And so sustaining that, building up the habit of working on it every week or setting aside time for it is really challenging. I think one thing that works really well for me is having a accountability partner or something like that, because I know I often keep promises to other people that I make to other people far more than I keep promises to myself. And so telling someone, oh, I want to work on this blog, can you check in and let me know, ask me if I've worked on it this week or if I've posted a blog post or something. I think that's really important. Okay, next slide. So I think just some other things to keep in mind is that it's really important to, again, what I said earlier, SAT and grades and all those things are kind of, I think, the foundation of things. So you can really pursue excellence if you often don't have a strong foundation. So if you wanted to start a blog, you probably need to be reasonably good at writing, right? And that comes a lot in school. If you want to start a tech startup, then you probably have to be reasonably good at math or science. And so it's important to make sure that you still have these foundations and you're still doing reasonably well in school, still caring about that. I think a lot of that comes through different study skills, study habits, making sure to manage time properly, getting time management, making sure to get enough sleep. I think those are all things that are really important. Another thing that's also really important is, I think, again, keeping in mind that mindset of continuing to grow, right? You can do anything, but don't be afraid to really think like, oh, what is something that I'm really interested in learning? How can I continue being better, right? So I think all of that is really important. And I think next slide. Okay. And just a couple final thoughts. So I think, one, it's always really important to remember that it's not always about college. Like I said at the beginning, if you do all this, I think regardless of whatever college you go to, I think you set yourself better up for the rest of your time. I think one of my friends, Adi, I think is speaking later today and is also going to talk a lot about that and examples of where that's true. So that's really important. Two, I think the philosophy that I always kind of go by is have a plan, but don't be afraid to change it. And so, I think even if you have no clue what you really want to do, it's better to make some sort of temporary plan now. And you can adjust and change as you go. But if you don't have a plan, then you'll just end up kind of like directionless or aiming around and not even sure what you want, right? But if you have a plan, you can say, oh, this is something that I want. Is it something that I still want? Is it something that I want to change? But at the same time, the second part of that is don't be afraid to change it, right? I think that a lot of people fall into a trap of saying like, oh, I want to be a doctor in 10 years, or I want to be a lawyer. And I have so many friends in high school or college who eventually decided that's not in fact what they wanted to do. And it took them way longer than they felt they should have to really understand like, oh, this is not what I want to do. So yeah, I think the other thing is just remember, whatever works for you should be most important. I think I've just spewed out a lot of advice, but in a lot of cases, this might not work for you. I think it works for most people, but find out what works for you best and go with that. And I think originally, I think we might be out of time, so I was thinking originally questions, but I'll be at the panel as well. If any of you want to ask me questions, my email is like stanley.yuan25@gmail.com, or if any of you have questions, you can come up to me whenever. Feel free. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Stanley. I definitely echo a lot of what Stanley said. I think it's especially important. I think a lot of kids get caught up in this whole, wow, and colleges require me to do so many activities, and just trying to do as many activities as possible. I think Stanley at one point was doing so many activities, he just fell asleep all the time. But I think it's important to do a few activities really, really well. And I think that's basically what Stanley talked a lot about.